Welcome to Transforming Work with Sophie Wade, exploring the future of work. Find out what's going on, disruptions, evolutions, opportunities, challenges, and interventions in our multi-generational distributed organizations. With a new tech and talent focus, discover what you need to know to stay upskilled and relevant and ensure your business keeps its competitive edge. Sophie investigates the promise and reality of the future of work now and as we look ahead. She interviews people who are changing work experiences and practices and shares how we can each transition smoothly and successfully to effective and more productive new ways of working.
Hi. This episode is about the art of work. It's about the core principles and pillars of work, whatever your company's model and perspective you bring, so that everyone can excel, focused on individual tasks, teamwork, and corporate objectives. This episode identifies the essential elements across your own and team members' daily and regular work activities that are important to ensure are included, emphasized, scheduled, and practiced with intention. I have discussed these aspects before with people transitioning from office-based routines, who have been rethinking work, reconfiguring routines, and learning new practices. For example, they have been reimagining key activities like collaboration for distributed teams. This discussion brings a different angle, and insights starting from a fully remote perspective, where different routines and work habits support fully distributed work arrangements. Different nuances and sensibilities surface, and yet whichever way we approach the art of work, core principles frame the new system. Intentional focus on culture, relationships, and processes, all purposefully designed, timed, and documented. I'm delighted to be talking with Chase Warrington, Head of Remote at Doist. Chase is a LinkedIn top voice on remote work, a global top 20 future of work influencer, and a future of work advisor. He is also host of the About Abroad podcast. Chase has been working remotely for almost 15 years, leading distributed teams around the world. Hi, Chase. How are you?
I am doing fantastic. Sophie, good to see you again. How are you?
I am very well. Good to see you. And you're in a slightly different background than last time when I actually met you live in person. So where are you now? The where is also important as well as the how and why.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Especially for those of us living in this world. I'm doing a little bit of a nomad thing. I'm not a nomad, or haven't been in many years. But my wife and I were looking for a little change over the last year or so, and so we've just arrived down in Crete in Greece, and we're going to spend a few months down here, enjoy a Greek island holiday kind of thing, but of course working the whole time too. So hopefully I'll get some time out in the sun and on the beaches.
Sure, you'll find that here and there in between your deep work.
Yes.
So I always start at the beginning, and I'm actually very curious, having done Chinese studies myself. You had a stint working for the China Daily in Beijing. How did that happen?
Such a fun experience. This was, that was an internship that I did while I was in university, in college. I was in the business school studying a division of finance, and about 2 years into that, realized that my real passion was in international business. I really loved the idea of working across cultural barriers and interacting with people from around the world, of starting to enjoy learning languages and things like that. And I just finished up a study abroad. So my mind was very focused on, going abroad, I guess you could say. And this program emerged in the business school, where basically you got paired up with a group of students over in Shanghai, and we worked on a project together. Completely, in retrospect, it's kind of interesting. It was completely asynchronous. We couldn't have meetings, so we created this big project over the course of 6 months, and then we went to Shanghai to present it to the founders of the board and whatever. And then you had the option to stay on and do an internship somewhere in China. I was hired by China Daily and got to spend a summer learning all about doing media in communist China, which was quite interesting.
So how was that experience? Because having studied Chinese, I know that the languages are not amazingly compatible, and the cultures are so very different. and how the language is structured. Obviously, having been working for 6 months with these students nicely and asynchronously in Shanghai, what were some of your takeaways from all of those experiences?
Well, I loved it. I'm sort of a nerd for these kind of things. So the challenge is something I seek out. There's a bit of chaos in there that I crave. And so for me, it was a lot of fun to have to battle that and try to learn a bit of Mandarin. The peak of my Mandarin, which is totally gone by now, by the way. I mean, I can count to 10, I think, still and say some basics, but like it's all gone. But at one point, I remember ordering a taxi and having to tell the taxi driver over the phone like how to navigate to my house
over the phone.
And I was really proud of that. Like it was the most basic it was a 2-minute conversation where it was like, hey, you need to go in front of the university, turn left, 2 stoplights on the right, something like that. But it was like, hallelujah, I did that.
That's big.
And that's fun. I did really learn a lot. Like that taught me a lot about working in a foreign country. I mean, expectations around work.
Yeah.
And the way you approach work, working across cultural barriers, like that was a really awesome learning experience in that way, and just solidified for me that like that needs to be a part of my future. Not necessarily in China, but just in general, I just needed to make that a part of what I was doing going forward.
Yes, I didn't think about it so purposefully at that point, but it was very dramatic for me to recognize how different work expectations and norms were when I started working in Hong Kong. And that was really something that helped me adapt. It says on LinkedIn that you were remote then. That was back in 2009. What prompted you to be working remotely way back then?
Yeah, it's actually kind of a fascinating thing in retrospect, again, because I didn't really, I didn't know the way my career would unfold, but I really sought out remote work. I mean, it was more so I was going into the business world and I wasn't going to go sit in a cube. Like, so that was my vantage point.
How had you worked out that sitting in the cube was not your thing?
Well, I believe it was sort of like a more of a process of elimination. So like in my mind, I was kind of purpose built to go into the quote unquote business world, whatever that meant, Right. I'd gone to the business school. I was going to go into that world. I thought I'd go into some form of finance, and all of those jobs were pretty much, office-based jobs. Sure. You just expected, especially at that time, that's what you were going to do. And I had it in my mind that like, okay, if that's what I'm going to do, I will be pretty miserable doing that. So what are some alternatives here?
Okay.
And remote work had kind of become a thing, and I had the seed planted in my head because my mom had actually, 10 years prior, had actually converted her nursing job into a remote job. She was working from home. She also manipulated a 4-day work week, which was really ahead of the time. So she turned a nursing career into a remote work job, working 4 days a week.
How do you do remote nursing? What were her job functions that she was able to do that? Because that's awesome.
She was basically coaching post-op, people who had just come out of surgery on how to rehabilitate themselves over the phone. The idea was she worked for an insurance company. They were trying to keep people out of going back to the hospital. So, yeah. Making sure people were following their plans and medicine and stuff. Turns out, to be honest, it was a horrible experience. They did all the things that we coach that you and I would tell a team not to do.
Right.
And so it was actually a pretty rough experience, but nonetheless, it planted the seed that, man, if she can turn a nursing degree, like even today, people would say, medical professionals and first responders, those are the people that have to be on site. Well, 20-something years ago, my mom figured out how to do that. Right. So I think I had that in my mind that there's got to be some way to do this. So I started seeking out jobs that would allow me to go into that space where I had a future as far as I could tell, but would allow me to just do something other than just sit in a cube. And J&J had a team, a small team, so it was a very hybrid organization. Almost 95% of the company was in the office, but there was this team that worked remotely, and I got a job working for them, and I took it.
How did you find that there was a remote team at the company?
I loved that this company. They were recruiting at my university, and I had met with them. I had actually planned to do an internship with them the summer before. Turned it down to do a summer road trip with my friends, which I was sure shot myself right in the foot, saying I'll never get hired by this company.
Right.
Cool enough, it turns out I had an interview with one of the executives and told him that, and he said, if anything, that's going to get you the job. And it turns out it was, because they loved that I put my life first a little bit before work. So that was an early lesson.
I love this
follow
company.
your heart. It was great. So, but they were recruiting, and they were hiring for a few positions, and I interviewed for those positions, but they were all in office. And I said, like, I love the company, I just don't love these roles. And they said, well, we have this other one. It's probably a bit above, where you're at. You're coming right out of university, but we can give it a shot. We could go put you in the interview process and see if it works out. And they took a chance, and it did. So that was kind of how it came to be.
So that's very interesting. So you were focused on the how of the work rather than specifically what this particular team was doing. And what was the team doing?
Yeah, exactly. So the team was responsible. Basically, everybody on the team had a geographic region that they were responsible for overseeing the revenue expansion of that space.
Right.
And so through a variety of methods, we were working with third parties and associations and marketing outlets, and our team internally, just to say, like, market research, things like that, basically crowdsourcing all that information and then figuring out how to elevate the revenue in that specific space. So it was really cool because I got to work with people, all different shapes and sizes, our clients, our partners, the parties we were selling for, our internal team. I was traveling to that I changed geographic zones quite a bit, but traveling to that area and meeting with clients and learning about the market and stuff. So it taught me a lot about, managing my own schedule. I worked from home. I was on the road all the time. I had my deliverables. We were very good at async work, even though we didn't call it that. I mean, it was just do your deliverables, write in what you're going to do every week, do it, write in what you're going to do every quarter, do it. And if you don't, we'll talk then. And that was really it.
So very much a results-focused orientation. As you were learning the factors that were enabling you to be successful, because you were so focused on the remote piece of it, trying to work out the best ways to work, what were some of the things that you were learning from the more seasoned members of the team, where there was a lot of good sharing in terms of helping you understand what their particular modes and methods were?
I think you'll like this a lot, because I don't really get to reflect on this very often, but I think you and I will have fun thinking about this, because it's actually kind of interesting. So my situation was very unique in this way. I was first assigned, my geographic territory happened to be the same space over where the home office was.
Oh.
And so I spent my first year with that company living in the same city as the home office. So all my coworkers were there, went into the office, but I was remote there. So I could go into the office. And in fact, early on, they wanted me to come in the first few months. I'm going to say 3 to 6 months. I don't remember exactly. I would go in one day a week just to kind of like, learn through osmosis from being in the office or whatever. And then I spent the rest of my time there living far from the home office. So I got that very interesting perspective as the person on my team who was closest to our boss, who was the CMO of the company, who was actually able to go to the company happy hour, who was at least occasionally in the office a little bit, got a little FaceTime in with people. And so I saw very quickly that there was some advantage to that. Okay. And then when I moved away, I felt that there was a disadvantage again, like you weren't on the same level as the people that were there in the office. And it wasn't implicit, it wasn't on purpose. It was because they had an amazing office culture. The people loved going into the office. Yeah. People really enjoyed working there. The culture was very strong. So I immediately felt like, I'm missing out on something by not being there. Okay. And this proximity bias is something that's just, it happens even in the best well-intentioned companies. Yeah. So anyway, it's a little bit of like an aside, I guess, but related to the question and I think it's interesting.
So. Yeah. So then why did you move to Doist?
Doist, yeah, well said.
No, well, actually, my first word, I thought it was Doist. And then when I realized what the company did, I'm like, it's Doist. It must be Doist.
When I interviewed at Doist, I was so thankful that I didn't in my head, it was Doist. And for some reason, I didn't say it until somebody in the company said it. So I'm with you. Don't worry. So I took a year off, actually. I I took a little gap year in between my time at J&J and joining Doist. I traveled. And the reason I left was really just because I was working remotely at that time, but I really wanted location independence. I was still tied to the U.S. geographically.
Okay.
And I just needed to be able to get out and live in other countries, and tried to work that out. To the credit of J&J, they really tried to figure it out. It just wasn't going to work at the time. So anyway, decided to leave, even though I was very happy, loved my coworkers, the career was going on the right path. We did the whole kind of stereotypical, I think, at this point, like sell everything, sold the house, quit the 2 corporate jobs, and set off to travel the world and figure it out as we go. And that's what we did. My wife and I built some e-commerce shops. We traveled for a year. And then I found Doist along the way. I started really missing being a part of a team.
Okay.
Also, I don't necessarily recommend everyone just, spend all your time with your significant other and run a business together. It can get a little murky at times. So I was really missing being a part of a team and needed a different challenge, and found Doist, and they were one of the few companies at that time too, Sophie, that were like, you can work from wherever you want and you don't have to be an engineer. And that second part's really important, because this is 7 years ago. There was, in fact, the way that I found Doist was through an article that was titled 72 Companies Hiring People that Will Work From Anywhere. And I went through that list, and 70 of them were engineering jobs.
Oh.
And 2 were not. Okay. And one of them was Doist. And as a non-engineer, that means you were very limited. So that's changed a lot now. But yeah, that's how I found Doist.
You were doing business development, as I understand the role from J&J. You also started out in business development for Doist, and then moved to become head of remote. Now, that's curious to me in the sense that Doist was very much pro-remote. I don't know what percentage of their employees were at that time working remotely. What stimulated the need to have somebody who had that title of head of remote? I get that it's a very important title at companies, but that probably isn't the company that I've imagined that needed that.
Yeah, absolutely. What I did at J&J fell under a marketing category. Business development marketing, you got a lot of different names. So I was doing I was in a marketing function that had revenue generating goals and KPIs tied to it. And when I came to Doist, they were searching for someone to run their international marketing team. Basically, we had a marketing person in each of our key markets. We translate and sell our products in countries all around the world, but it's translated into 19 different languages.
Wow.
And marketed in those 19 different markets. And so we had somebody in each of those countries really pushing the product, optimizing the product for the market, things like that. So I came in under the head of marketing to manage that team for her, essentially. And then over time, we decided to have a business development arm. We didn't have any kind of a business development arm. And the way we defined business development at Doist was really special projects. It was anything that didn't fit squarely somewhere else that could have an impact on our revenue. Every company has this, right? You have all these projects you want to get to, but nobody can take ownership of it. Right. So that role was created, and I was really excited about moving into that space. And one of the projects that we took on early in that new position was, how do we make Doist one of those companies that's synonymous with remote work? This was pre-pandemic.
Okay.
To answer kind of the second part of your question, Doist has been remote first since day one. The company was founded in 2007. We really started scaling up and hiring in 2012, and we've been remote first ever since. So at that time, I think we had 40 or 50 employees in something like 15 or 20 countries, and today we're around 100 people in 35 different countries. So that is kind of how the transition happened. I took on the project of how does Doist become a leader in the remote space. We had a lot of things already going for us. We had an awesome blog all about remote work. We had awesome documentation. Or like at least pretty good documentation. We had a lot of the tools in place, and we wanted to say, hey, world, this is the wave of the future at some point. We didn't know the pandemic would be coming, but this is what we think the future of work can look like. And we want to be a part of that conversation. Fast forward to the pandemic, and all of a sudden everything changed. And we said, this used to be an advantage for us that we were remote first, hiring, brand, the tools that we create. But this landscape's shifting so fast now, we need to be able to make sure that we're at the forefront of those changes. So this is such a core part of who we are. Even though we think we're good at remote first, we want to make sure we stay at the forefront of that conversation and at the forefront of that evolution. So let's make sure we have somebody that owns that for us at Doist. So that's how it came to be.
Got it. I guess I'm a tiny bit confused because the very essence of what Doist does is effectively enabling tools for asynchronous work. The company was starting to reflect more of what it was doing.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
I'd say we kind of talk about it like we have three brands, really. We have Todoist and Twist, which are the products that we actually sell. And then there's Doist, which is sort of a brand in and of itself. And we want Doist to be, we have this motto that we want to do everything at a world-class level.
Right.
So whether we're talking about designing or building product or customer service or whatever, and doing remote, it falls into that category too. And being the best remote first company out there is important to us. Not because we want to stand at the top of the podium and pat ourselves on the back, but because that's the standard that we're trying to hold ourselves to in every regard. So, it's not like we're selling a remote first service, or coaching or anything like that. It's more about, this is the future of work. We want to help build it. And that is literally our company mission statement, is to build the future of work. So it's baked into everything that we do.
I saw that on the website. Having myself worked in a number of different countries, how people are working and what their needs are and how they're going to be manifesting the future of work in different ways, in different stages, with different emphases. How were you already then and later seeing how the product was being used, how it needed to be tweaked in different countries? Because I think that's really interesting for people to be understanding. There's no one size fits all, and work is so different in different countries, which means also that when you're enabling asynchronous work, it's going to be showing up in different ways.
Yeah, this is super fascinating because, we, for example, we have people in 35 different countries, but if you remove a bunch of outliers, a lot of people tend to be in North America and Europe. Okay. On the spectrum of how people work around the world, like North Americans and Europeans work fairly similarly and approach problem solving and productivity and things in a somewhat similar way. And so we see that reflected, the way that we approach this, the way we've built the products. Okay. You can see that reflected in where our customer bases are. And so we've spent a lot of time, a lot of market research, a lot of emphasis on how to market the product, sell the product, but also tweak the product for different markets. And what we've landed on is that we really, you can pull a bunch of levers, but what we've landed on is that what we need to do is really focus on building the product that works best for us. We really turn everything inwards and say, what works for Doist? Okay. We want to build the future of work. We want to live and breathe it. So let's build Twist for us. Let's build Todoist so that we can manage all of our projects across the company in Todoist. And then hopefully that extrapolates out to the rest of the world in a meaningful way. And then we have to tweak the marketing more than the product. So we're focused. We're highly focused on that. But yeah, it's very interesting. I mean, for you and I, people that went out of our way to go learn some Mandarin and experience China and other countries around the world, this is the fun stuff.
It really is. It's very interesting to hear that we are fundamentally, whether it may be at different times of day or different days of the week, working in very similar ways. And then as you took this role as head of remote, what were the changes that were necessary to make at Doist to enable people using your own products to be working much more effectively and also generating those relationships and leaning into those relationships that are so critical to help teams and people work effectively together?
Yeah, it was such a fun challenge to take on. I was a bit nervous about it at first, to be honest, because Doist had already set the bar pretty high in terms of doing remote work. And then I'm kind of charged with making it 1% better, and it's a lot easier to,
Yes.
in some ways, it's a lot easier to build a house from scratch than it is to remodel one that's already in pretty good shape, because you don't want to mess anything up, right?
Right.
So I approached with caution, and also recognizing that we don't need to do any drastic overhauls here. I was really fortunate. The person who I've been reporting to is Alan Christensen, our COO. And he and I sat down and really looked through everything that I could work on. And the big glaring issue that we noticed, keep in mind this is mid-pandemic as well, was that we were pretty good at work, getting work done, but we were lacking some depth in the way that we approached connection as a remote team. Culture and connection.
All right.
Were lacking a bit.
These are hot topics. Tell me more.
The thing that was kind of fascinating was I basically spent most of the first year of my time in this role not so much focused on how we worked. I mean, it wasn't tools, it wasn't processes. It was, how do we build deeper, more meaningful connections, psychological safety, trust, employee engagement. How do we bring people back together physically, in offsite retreat kind of space, and optimize that. Virtual connections on a personal level, but also on a work level. And so I spent most of my time in that space. There was an element where I was also looking externally at what other companies were doing and bringing that information back in. It was one of the really cool, if that's a fair word to use, cool parts of that chapter of this of this evolution, is that lots of new products, lots of new services, lots of new best practices being shared. And so that was part of the role too, was looking outward and saying, hey guys, we've been doing it this way, but other people are starting to do it this way. And maybe there's an area here where we can level up.
And what were a couple of the externally researched new tweaks that you found were particularly interesting? And did they work for Doist when you brought them in, as I imagine you did?
Yeah. So a great example of this is so we've had a culture of very strong documentation for a long time. And we thought we were pretty good at that. But when we built our handbook that we use internally, which is our central source of truth, I mean, it's vital for you hear all really solid distributed teams talking about having that central source of truth. We had invested a lot in it, but it was in a place that was not ideal for a lot of people in the company, and wasn't easy to navigate, wasn't easy to edit. So a big percentage of the company wasn't actually using it in the way that we would like them to be able to. And so we started looking around and we said, man, there's new products emerging to help with documentation that are more collaborative, more transparent, easier accessibility, and better interface. And so it's going to be, we started looking at what other teams were doing, how they were approaching it, and decided to invest in not just a new platform, but a whole new approach to the way that we do documentation. And that was based on external feedback on what other people were doing.
Right.
We were good where we were, but we needed to get to that world-class level. And so that's I think a very real example of what we're talking about there.
In terms of the relationship piece that had stimulated the opportunity for this new role to be created, how are you changing how relationships were being built to create that connectivity? And I think this feeds into the question that you and I talked about when we met, which was about remote first and what remote first means. Just for the listeners to be clear, for me, remote first is people can be working where they want, with the view that the people who need to be included and always thought of first are the people who aren't necessarily in the office, whenever they may not be in the office. So that is top of mind to deal with the proximity bias and recency bias and those type of things.
We were already doing a lot of things, but unlike our approach to work, we weren't taking the approach to connection as seriously. So, for example, we didn't have much documentation around this. We didn't have any set practices, principles, nothing in place that would dictate to someone, hey, this is an important part of who we are. We occasionally did, for example, virtual activities that brought people together in fairly meaningful ways, but they were sporadic and run, without a lot of thought put into them. It was just an activity to do sometimes. So we completely restructured the way we do, first of all, by putting pen to paper and saying, this is how we're going to focus on connection and culture, or enhancing our culture here at Doist. And so we built out a series of activities that take place asynchronously and virtually. We built out a series of activities that take place virtually and synchronously. And then we really honed in on our offsite and retreat strategy. We call it our IRL strategy, in real life strategy. And we really honed in on how we wanted that to serve our needs as a company. And by clearly defining that and getting everyone rowing in the same direction on those things, putting in some standard practices that would actually let people know what we were expecting in this regard, we started to take it as seriously as we took our work. And that paid dividends over time.
What do you find are the optimal periods, the frequency of these different types of getting together virtually? Obviously, it depends on the teams and the company, but in your experience, what has worked?
Yeah, so a little bit of context here. We're hyper asynchronous, like very, even by asynchronous terms, we're very, very asynchronous. On average, Doisters have about 2 hours or less of meetings per week.
Per week? Whoa.
Per week.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's very, very little. And in fact, nobody reports having on average more than 5 hours of meetings per week. Literally 0%. So there's a very strong tendency towards asynchronous. And those numbers that I just mentioned include our executives. Our CEO is notorious for having a completely empty calendar. So we're very much on that side of the spectrum.
So that puts it in context in terms of the need to actually kind of see your face.
Yes. Yeah. It's important. We definitely went through a stage where we said, is someone wrote a thread in Twist, our communication tool. Have we gone off the deep end? Have we gone too far with this whole async thing?
Yep.
So we needed to do more. And especially, going through the pandemic, we were already doing an annual retreat before the pandemic, a few years before we started doing those. But obviously, for 3 years, we couldn't do them. We had hired 25 or 30 people that had never met another teammate. We were rarely doing in-person or virtual, synchronous meetings or much less like a social gathering. And nobody wanted to do, Zoom happy hours. That wasn't appealing either. We're not going to just do it just to do it. Again, world-class level, how do we do these things so that people actually want to participate in them and get something out of them, but also see it as an extension of work, not something extra to layer on top of work. And that distinction, I think, is very key and something to make sure that we emphasize when talking about this stuff. A lot of leaders will say, yeah, we want our teams to meet and have, let's just use the proverbial Zoom happy hour as the thing that we're talking about. But they'll layer that on top of work. So I've got 40 hours of work plus 1 hour. Nobody wants to do it.
No, that doesn't work. It is fundamental to creating relationships that make work more effective. So it should be part of work hours. How do you do onboarding? Understanding that you have historically had very little live synchronous interactions. How did you make onboarding effective?
So there's kind of two important factors here. One is we really want people to get indoctrinated into the asynchronous way of working because we are asynchronous. So that's very much so a part of the onboarding. The onboarding is done almost entirely asynchronously. 80% of the onboarding is super async. So it's go at your own pace. You get a Todoist project that walks you through every element, a bunch of threads to read that are sent to you, articles, recommended readings, stuff like that. But we go a good bit heavier on the synchronous dose that you get during those first few months.
So I can feel comfortable reaching out to you. Hey, Chase, I just don't get this or whatever.
Exactly. That's a really important stage when somebody first joins the company, and it's not a time to sit back and say, hey, we're asynchronous. You don't get to talk to people.
Right.
So first we assign you a mentor, and time zone is at least we try to take that into account
Right.
to a degree so that you can sync up with that person when you need to. You've got a mentor assigned to you for 6 months. We also fly you to meet your mentor and spend a week with them, co-working and just hanging out, having fun together.
I like that.
And then we also assign a bunch of synchronous activities for you to, putting you in contact for little coffee chats with people around the company. And so we lean more into synchronous work during those first few months of onboarding. But we also it sounds like I'm talking out of both sides of my mouth when I say we do that and it's hyper asynchronous. But the rest of it's true to say that the rest of the onboarding is like it's really at your own pace, and it's made purposefully built that way so that people feel like, okay, I have to jump right in and start working asynchronously,
Right.
To get in the flow of the company.
I love the mentor idea. These integrated non-work relationship building times, because you're so asynchronous, what frequency have you found to be important? So
what we do is we try to have two synchronous activities virtual synchronous activities per month. So that's why I provided the context, because if you figure, let's say 2 to 3 hours total, might sound like a lot or a little, depending on where you're coming from. But for people that are used to only having 2 hours of meetings per week, that's a fairly big percentage increase. So we try to balance that, and make sure that they're not overflowing with activities on their social calendar. But they're completely optional to join is one big thing. Like, we don't pressure people to join these. There's no pressure at all. If you want to join, then we want to provide you with these. But if not, no worries. And then we do 2 annual meetups per year. So basically every 6 months, you are looking forward to meeting with either the whole company in a couple of weeks. In less than 2 weeks, we'll all be getting together in Italy. As an entire company. And then 6 months later, all the individual teams will travel to meet each other and spend a week together as well in different parts of the world.
Love that. And I'm curious, because Doist has a much more asynchronous way of working than most other companies. Does that attract a particular type of person? And do you also recognize the type and have particular questions or paying attention to the type of person to make sure that they are comfortable with that amount of time that they are not going to be? I mean, not that people want to be in meetings for hours, because we know that they don't, but 2 to 5 hours a week could feel quite lonely to some people.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, early on, before we really started paying attention to this, and more so just kind of like standing strong, saying we don't need to talk to people. We're just going to do everything asynchronous. We lost, people here and there who were just like, this isn't my way of working. So, we retailored our approach to work a little bit. Again, did we go off the deep end? We also retailored our hiring and onboarding process to make sure it was purpose built. A lot of stuff, we say this all the time now, right? Like, don't copy anything from the old world, the office space world, right? And paste it into the distributed world. But sometimes we did that, building the airplane as you're flying it a bit, and there was some legacy debt in there that you said, oh, we gotta go back and clean this up. So we've done that, and it's really helped. I mean, we scream, we're looking for people that really prefer communicating asynchronously, that don't rely on the office space culture, that have experience working remotely, that are excellent writers, not just lengthy writers, not good at writing novels, but good at writing succinctly and powerfully. And so these are the kind of things we're really like screening for, and our team is kind of purpose built to work that way.
If one has a great schedule that is freed up of all these meetings, it means I can get all this amazing work done. I also do need to have some local community. Do you help as a company, as the head of remote? This is going to a conversation I had with John Reardon about the next wave of supporting people who are working remotely either all the time or part of the time, encouraging them and prompting them to develop relationships and ties in their local community.
100%. And I can't take any credit for this. I mean, this was built into Doist before I arrived as our head of remote, but it's something that our leadership team feels really strongly about. There's plenty of data to back up the fact that while all these CEOs are worried about remote workers not working. They should probably be more worried about burnout and overwork than they should people not showing up to work, at least if you structure the company in the right way. And so we take that really seriously. I mean, we urge people to get out, to disconnect from work. You don't get rewarded for working long hours or being the first one online or the last one online. We want people to show up fully and disconnect completely, and that's very important to us in the way that we approach vacation time, for example, but also in the way we approach the day to day. Like if we see people working odd hours, well, that might get called out.
Okay.
But we also fund people. Like we want people to go to a co-working space. So we don't ask how much it costs. If you need a co-working space, it's covered.
Okay. Nice.
Gym membership covered, activities outside, learning and education and social groups and things like that. We want to encourage you to go do those things if it calls to you. So, and we also encourage sharing. Where we met, I think this is a pretty cool point. You and I met at Running Remote in Lisbon, and I sat on the panel with Darren Murph, previously at GitLab and now at Andela, who said something along the lines of, a big part of the future of work is going to be encouraging remote employees to bring their local community back into the quote unquote office.
Yeah. That's good.
And so he's talking about, for example, going out and doing community service or going out and doing a fitness class or whatever in your local community, but then sharing that internally and saying, hey, look, this is my life here.
Yeah.
And so we're trying to pull more of that in. We want, we need social life.
Right.
Working remotely doesn't mean working alone and isolated. You and I know that, but a lot of people think that that's what it means, sitting alone in your bedroom, as Malcolm Gladwell liked to put it. And it's like, no, we can get out and we can actually enjoy really deep, meaningful relationships in our local communities and then come together a few weeks per year and spend time with our teammates and kind of get the best of both worlds.
We're all moving to new ways of working, and there is still a lot of resistance from many leaders for all kinds of reasons. And there's going to be another pushback. There was one in the spring, and now anticipating more push to return to the office however many days a week, starting in September. After Labor Day in the US is a typical date. What are your recommendations, your thoughts for leaders and managers who are challenged by moving to these new ways of working, which do require effort and energy and design and thinking how we work, trying to get rid of all those meetings? What are your thoughts in terms of what they should do? Because it's not easy.
Yeah, I think part of this conversation should be a bit more of acknowledging that last part that you said, which that it's not easy. And it can be a little bit ridiculous maybe of some of us who have been living in this world, working this way for a long time, to expect people to have been working in a particular way for 30, 40 years and to expect us to, snap our fingers and approach work in a completely different way now. So I think it's fine to acknowledge that. And then, I just would like to ask those people when I do get to have the conversations with people in that position sometimes, and they're fascinating because they're coming from a totally different end of the spectrum. And I always challenge them to think about it this way. We are where we are today. In 5 years or 10 years, do you believe that the world will be more distributed or less distributed? And depending on what your answer is to that, are you building for today, tomorrow, yesterday?
Right.
Which direction are you going in? Yeah. And it seems pretty easy. I mean, there's plenty of research out there from very unbiased resources that show that while we're seeing like a dip in work from home days now or work from anywhere days now compared to in the middle of the pandemic, we're still 5, 6, 7x of where we were pre-pandemic, and that number from today will only continue to increase.
Sure.
So we need to compare it to pre-pandemic, not mid-pandemic, and don't see this little drop off as what's to come, but actually it's more of the jumping off point for a higher trajectory. So
agreed.
That's my challenge to them.
And it sounds so simple when you say it like that. What haven't I asked you that I should have done?
Oh, great question. I would love to chat a little bit more about the approach to offsites and retreats and how that's playing into what we're doing. So, I would just say that I was surprised when we were at Running Remote together how big of a topic this was. Surprised because it was reassuring because it became a huge point of emphasis for us at Doist. And I think there's this whole mentality that remote first means remote only, and everybody that I know in this space that's been in it for a while believes that to not be the case. And so incorporating a really strong in-person strategy is becoming a core element of doing remote really, really well. And I think that's really interesting. Like we've gone back, it's another one of those areas at Doist where we decided to level up the approach to retreats and in-person interaction. What are our goals? Why are we really doing this? What do we want to get out of them?
Right.
How do we use it to build the things that we actually want to build? And what are those things that we need to define them? And then also cutting down on the not bureaucracy, but efficiency, making them more efficient to plan and execute. There can be a lot of debt taken on when you're incorporating bringing hundreds of people together from around the world. It can dilute focus, and it was for a long time. So cutting down on the costs in that way, and then also increasing the return on investment, and really making it a core part. I mean, we went from one retreat, first doing 0 retreats to doing 1. Now we're doing 2 per year.
Okay.
We'd like to maybe expand to 3.
Right.
So anyway, I think it's an interesting part of the discussion because, we're trained a little bit to think that like it's very binary. It's you're in person or you're not.
Right.
And it's a mix of the two that's the secret sauce, I think.
Yes, I agree. So I always have one question at the very end, but before I ask you that, I do want to mention that you have a podcast, which you've been doing for several years now, called About Abroad. What's that about and who's that for?
Yeah, thank you. So About Abroad was a side project that I had brewing in my mind for a long time. For like a bit of personal context, I'm from the U.S. and I've lived abroad in many different countries. I spent the last 5 years living in Spain. I'm currently kind of scouting out maybe my next move, if not back to Spain. So anyway, it's a big part of my life has been exploring other cultures, living abroad as an expat, a digital nomad. I'm not very nomadic anymore these days, but that's been a big part of my personal experience. And especially as, I started to get more involved with the evolution of remote work and future of work and all of that, being an expat, living abroad, having lived in a bunch of different countries, my inbox started to fill up with lots of questions about subjects that I would kind of loosely tie to like global mobility.
Okay.
And that's also one of the things that really excites me about the future of work is like the opportunities that it opens up for people from around the world because, they say like, opportunity is talent is evenly distributed, but opportunity is not. And so remote work changes that.
Right.
So anyway, I wanted to start a podcast to answer some of those questions because I couldn't do it one by one. And I'm also a podcast junkie. and so I bring on guests from around the world who are thought leaders and experts in the world of expat life, digital nomadism, visas, future of work. We touch on a lot of subjects.
Right.
Anything that would help you kind of like live a life beyond your borders is the cheesy tagline that I've come up with.
Love that. So my last question is practical. It's for listeners. What can they do tomorrow? And I'm going to focus on async work because that's what you know, that's what you do, that's what Doist does. If you're going to take the first steps with distributed workers, however distributed, whether they're moving flexibly or not, what are the first steps that can help them improve how effectively people are working in distributed fashion?
Excellent question. The ultimate goal is to get to a point where async is your default, and it's really hard to jump from synchronous being your default to asynchronous being your default overnight. But it's also important to know the end goal. And so if you want to do async, I find it's really hard to be that team that says we're 60% async and 40% sync. That the tendency is going to be to fall back to sync as your default. So putting a stake in the sand and saying we're committing to this is what I would say do tomorrow, and then start re-optimizing the way you do things. Go back and pressure test, question every single activity that you do at your company to see, does this fit the async model, or is it more built for the synchronous model? And that can be as small as like, hey, we have a culture of, hey, do you have 5 minutes to hop on a call real quick? Or, do you, I need an answer on this right now. None of those things fit in the async world. So you have to start changing that.
Right.
You have to start documenting it and creating a culture of documentations, and not meetings go away completely, but meetings are no longer the first resort. They're the last resort. And so take those baby steps to get to that end goal.
Thank you, Chase. Fascinating conversation. I have to get my head around the idea of just 2 to 5 hours of meetings, knowing that in the US, certainly it went from 10 hours, average number of hours per week in meetings, to 23. That was 2017. And I know it's far more than that for so many companies. I really, really appreciate and love everything that you shared and how useful it is in terms of thinking about how we can be working much more effectively using particularly asynchronous working.
Yeah. Well, thank you. You've been pioneering for a really long time. So I've enjoyed getting to know you and appreciate you bringing me on the show and letting me share a little bit about our experience. But yeah, thanks for all the work that you do as well. It's awesome and much appreciated.
Thanks so much, Chase. Thanks again so much to Chase Warrington, head of remote at Doist and host of the About Abroad podcast. You can follow Chase on LinkedIn and find out more about Doist at doist.com, doist.com, as well as find out more about his podcast dedicated to exploring life beyond your borders at aboutabroad.com. Immediate action tip. The ultimate goal is for asynchronous work to be the default. Put a stake in the sand for what percentage of asynchronous work you are committing to. Then start optimizing the way your company works. Question every single work-related activity to see if it fits the async or synchronous model better. Create a culture of documentation, and meetings become the last resort, not the first. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with a friend and like it, and even write a quick review wherever you listen. For regular video updates, curated useful articles, research, and information, follow me on LinkedIn and Twitter at @ASophieWade. For more information to help navigate this period of transformation, you can also sign up for my Work in Progress newsletter on LinkedIn and my blog, which is available on sophiewade.com and flexelnetwork.com. Until next time.